Welcome to Perfectionists Anonymous, a podcast-style channel dedicated to unraveling the myth of perfectionist living. I'm your host, Caitlin, and I'm a recovering perfectionist. I invite you to sit down, relax, and hang out with me, your supportive friend, who knows how difficult perfectionism can be and who wants to find a better way. Thank you for joining me today. And I said to my body, softly, I want to be your friend. It took a long breath and replied, I have been waiting my whole life for this. Naira Waheed. Greetings, fellow perfectionists. I hope you are all doing well. Today's topic is a big one, and honestly probably one that will have several follow-up episodes in the future. It's also one of the most common areas for perfectionistic thinking to take its hold. And because our culture is so incredibly appearance obsessed, it's one of the most pervasive thought structures in our entire culture. As a general content warning, if the title already did not make it clear, today's episode covers in-depth perfectionist thoughts surrounding weight, diet, exercise, and body image. If these are sensitive topics for you and you need to skip this episode, I understand. I have written and rewritten this episode multiple times now. The perfectionist in me really wants to do this complex and nuanced topic justice, while addressing everything with the proper tone, the most eloquent words, and the most accurate research. But I know that that is a perfectionist trap, because there is no way to have this conversation perfectly. All I know for sure is that I've decided to share some perfectionistic beliefs and ideals about body image, diet, and exercise in today's episode that I no longer subscribe to. If you currently subscribe to these beliefs, I'm not saying that you shouldn't. If you don't subscribe to these beliefs and you already agree with me, I'm not saying that we're objectively right. I am not the arbiter of the universe. I'm not a dietitian, a doctor, or a personal trainer. I'm not a psychologist. What I am is a woman who spent at least half of her entire life hating her body. I'm a woman who had orthorexia for 6 years, who punished her quote-unquote poor food choices with grueling exercise, who pinched her fat and wondered how much plastic surgery would cost to remove it, who stood in the mirror and identified every flaw on her body that needed to change before I would be worthy. And what I also am is a woman who decided that that way of life was no longer worthwhile for me. I no longer believe that hating myself and my body is how I want to live my life. But in order to become a woman who no longer believes those things, I had to read, research, go to therapy, and ultimately stop believing the perfectionistic thoughts that I'm about to share with you today. I'm not exaggerating when I say that ridding myself of these thoughts is easily one of the biggest changes I have made for myself to move from self-hating perfectionist to recovering perfectionist. Rewiring my brain around this topic has helped me in countless ways, and my hope is that sharing these thoughts with you may help you see that you have other options too. It's entirely possible that you have gone your whole life believing these same thoughts that I used to believe. And if, at the end of this episode, you decide you still want to keep those thoughts, that's okay too. I'm not here to tell you or anyone else what to do. I'm just your supportive friend, and my sincere hope is that my vulnerability will provide you with a safe space that invites you to ask questions, to be kind to yourself, and to consider whether what you're being told by society is serving you. Because I have a sneaking suspicion that you are like me. In her book, Beauty Sick: How the Cultural Obsession with Appearance Hurts Girls and Women, author Dr. Renee Engeln shares the alarming statistic that 90% of women report disliking at least one thing about their body, and 50% of women reported global discontent, meaning that they had a negative perception of the entirety of their body. Side note, I will definitely be linking this book in the description because it is a life-changing read. I'm going to repeat that statistic again. 90% of women dislike one thing about their body, at least, and 50% dislike everything about their body. When the numbers are that bad, well, the situation is dire. That is a level of self-hate and negativity that is unprecedented. So let's talk about where all that body hate comes from. From this point forward, I'm going to be calling these perfectionistic body image thoughts perfectionist lies. This doesn't necessarily mean that I think they are fully lies, but I am proposing that they are at the very least partial untruths or lies by omission, and that we almost never hear the alternative interpretations of these thoughts. And 3 last caveats. First, the word fat will be frequently used in a negative context because that is how society uses the word fat. I do not personally believe that fat is negative, but it is undeniable that that is how the word is colloquially used. Second, I do not want this episode in any way to come across as blaming individual persons for the decisions that they make regarding their own bodies. My issue is pretty much always with the societal and cultural systems that perpetuate problematic perfectionist thinking patterns that hurt people. Locking on to any of these perfectionist thoughts is a coping strategy that people use to try and feel whole and like they belong, and it's completely understandable. I just want to examine alternatives. Third, I would be remiss to not mention that the body positivity movement is largely thanks to people who exist in marginalized bodies, being forced to fight for their bodies to be accepted in society as they are. Those origins should not be forgotten. And now, let's get into it. Perfectionist lie number 1. Losing weight is good and gaining weight is bad. We are taught that gaining weight is one of the worst things that can happen to you. The number ticking up on the scale? That should never happen. The number ticking down? Now that's where you want to be. Black and white thinking, easy as pie. I used to believe this lie, and I used to believe that there was absolutely no wiggle room or concessions to be made. However, there are a number of times in life where gaining weight is a completely normal and healthy biological response. When you are pregnant and literally growing another human, when you are going through puberty, when your body experiences other hormonal changes, such as menopause or postpartum changes, when you are recovering from an eating disorder, when you start new medications or stop old ones, when you have an underlying health condition, when you experience a huge change in your life, such as divorce or the death of a family member, or when you are struggling with your mental health. I could honestly list more. Similarly, there are a number of times where losing weight is not healthy. When you are suffering from an eating disorder, when you are impoverished and therefore malnourished, when you have a stomach flu, when you have a parasitic infection, when you start new medications or stop old ones, when you experience a huge life change, or when you are struggling with your mental health. And people may say, well, sure, I guess those situations kind of make sense sometimes. But even within those moments, we give ourselves so little grace. When I hit puberty when I was 15 years old, I gained about 15 to 20 pounds within the course of a year. This is actually a pretty natural response to puberty, in which my body was changing from that of a literal child into the body of a woman. Weight gain is to be expected, but I viewed it at the time as a moral failing, and so did my classmates. I'll never forget the day during senior year when a boy in my class loudly reminisced on the year that Caitlin got fat. And I wasn't even mid or plus sized. I was still very much straight sized. I went from weighing 110 pounds to 130 pounds. Gasp. But that was still enough for people to feel that shame needed to be assigned because remember, gaining weight is always bad. I don't believe this anymore, but it took a lot of work not to. I don't weigh myself anymore because I don't think that the number on the scale defines my worth. And that's the lie. Our society likes to pretend that gaining weight is a sign of a lapse in your morality, and that losing weight is the sign of a well-adjusted, healthy, good person. Believing that only made me judge myself and others. Believing that made me incredibly unhappy. I now choose to believe that losing or gaining weight is simply a biological response, usually one that makes a great deal of sense given the underlying biological mechanisms at play. Perfectionist lie number 2. Health and weight are always negatively correlated, i.e., the more you weigh, the less healthy you are. The less you weigh, the healthier you are. This lie is so embedded in our culture. We are taught that bigger people are unhealthy, and that's why they should lose weight. We care about overweight people when we shame them, really, because we just want them to be healthy. But weight and health do not have a perfect cause and effect relationship. I'm paraphrasing Mary Jelkovsky from the Mary's Cup of Tea podcast here, but plenty of people who exist in larger bodies eat healthy foods, move their bodies regularly, have no underlying medical conditions, don't smoke, don't drink in excess, don't engage in drug use, and essentially just live as regular healthy people, just in a body that is genetically predisposed to be on the larger side. Plenty of people who exist in smaller bodies are malnourished and not getting the vitamins or nutrients their bodies need, drink heavily, smoke regularly, have underlying health conditions, engage in drug use, and live their lives with habits that have been scientifically proven to be detrimental to your overall health. But they are not the ones that society deems to be unhealthy with just a single glance. But you may be saying, obesity is linked with high cholesterol, high blood pressure, heart conditions, increased risk of stroke, and so on. To which I say, that is true. But there are a lot of additional cards at play besides just a person's weight. I strongly encourage people to look into the Health at Every Size movement, which advocates for our healthcare system and doctors to look beyond just weight when determining a person's health. Think about how a person's diet, their sleep, their movement, their mental health, their medical conditions, their medications, their socioeconomic status, their stress levels, their genetics, and more can play just as much into health as anything else. Is weight really the only cause of unhealth, or is it sometimes a symptom? Food for thought, which brings me to perfectionist lie number 3. Diets and exercise are good for you. Name the diets with me now. South Beach, Atkins, Nutrisystem, Weight Watchers, Noom, Keto, Vegetarian Vegan, Elimination, Gluten-Free, Intermittent Fasting, Juice Cleanse, Whole Foods, Paleo, Mediterranean. The list goes on and on. We are marketed diets and diet plans so regularly that they have become ubiquitous. I can't tell you how often I hear women discussing what diet they're on, how many calories an item of food has, how they shouldn't eat that particular food, how they're trying to be good, how hungry they are because of their diet, how it's a cheat day, and what foods they can't eat because of their diet. It's pervasive. A day honestly doesn't go by that I don't hear somebody speaking about diets in this way. I never tried a specific diet, but for years I maintained a strict calorie intake routine. I used to measure out my cereal and milk with a measuring cup so as not to go over the serving size. I used to only order the low-calorie options on menus at restaurants instead of getting what I actually wanted. I used to buy the diet versions of all foods just so I could take in lower calories. I used to force myself to do exercises that I hated, running, aerobics, and ellipticals, because I believed that I was supposed to get in an hour of cardio every single day. It was only a few years ago that I stopped and looked at these habits and thought to myself, how on earth could these be good for me? How could I possibly believe the lies that what I was doing was healthy? I was depriving myself of essential vitamins and nutrients by restricting my diet so heavily. I was so incredibly malnourished. That isn't good for you. I would work out on an empty stomach to the point where I would nearly pass out. That isn't good for you either. Diet versions of foods like low-fat pudding or sugar substitutes have to be heavily modified in order to exist, and are packed with preservatives and artificial ingredients, many of which have research that supports that they are not good for you. Aspartame, for example. I started to wonder why I was doing this to myself. Why would I deprive myself of so many of the delicious, wholesome foods that a short life has to offer? Why would I secretly feel proud of myself for almost passing out after exercising? Because I believed, because I was taught, that I was doing the right, good, healthy thing by dieting and exercising. I believed that's what healthy people did, even though what I was doing and what so many people do was incredibly unhealthy. Restricting our bodies of what they need and restricting our bodies of what they want, forcing our bodies to do things they are incapable of doing or have no reason to do, that's not healthy. And that's not how I want to live my life anymore. Our culture promotes the idea that everyone should be on a diet and exercise plan, regardless of how much you actually even weigh. But that is largely a lie, in my opinion. To illustrate this, how many straight-sized, thin people, not even people who are considered overweight, have you heard say that they just want to lose 10 pounds? Too many. Instead, I now subscribe to the idea that people should eat what makes their bodies feel good and whole, and that people should move their bodies in ways that they enjoy and that make their bodies feel good. And it shouldn't be about losing weight, nor should it be disguised as a health movement or a change in lifestyle when the focus is obviously still about losing weight. I prefer a more forgiving lens, one that approaches nourishment of the human body in a holistic, kind, and yes, still healthy way. What is this way? Intuitive eating is certainly one. I will be linking resources about intuitive eating in the description down below, along with multiple other resources and accounts that have helped me in my body image journey. But anyway, moving on. Perfectionist lie number 4. Your body flaws are your fault, and you can and should change them. Hip dips, small breasts, thin lips, fat rolls, cellulite, stretch marks. These things are either genetic, impossible to avoid because everyone has them, or caused by living the human experience. However, solutions to these supposed problems are just as ubiquitous as diet talk. Daily, I get at least one advertisement for a body change solution on my social media accounts. Maybe it's a lip-plumping lip gloss. Maybe it's an exercise plan. Maybe it's a concealer to cover up unsightly blemishes. Maybe it's a lotion to avoid stretch marks. Daily is not an exaggeration. Society likes to teach us that all of these little imperfections on our bodies are things that are easily fixed. You just need to buy the product or put in the effort. The counter-narrative that these things on our bodies are not actually imperfections and are fine exactly as they are, that narrative wouldn't make anybody any money. If we all felt okay with our wrinkles, our blemishes, our scars, our rolls, our pudge, then we wouldn't keep buying things to fix them. The billion-dollar beauty, diet, and exercise industries would crumble. That's really what helped me see this perfectionist thought as a lie. I used to think that my hip dips were my fault. I used to think that I was too fat and I was collecting too much fat in my muffin top area. So of course it was all my fault. And so I paid for exercise plans that promised to tone my hips, thighs, and glutes, also secretly hoping that I would end up with a coveted thigh gap too. I bought undergarments that promised to slim those unsightly rolls and rid me of the muffin top. I paid a lot of money. I wasted a lot of money. Because when I started researching bodies and body image, I learned that I have hip dips because of my bones. The physical distance between my pelvis and my femur was such that no matter how much I weighed, I would always have hip dips. Similarly, I learned that I am extremely unlikely to ever have a thigh gap, even if I were to lose weight, because of the way that my femurs sit within my pelvis. It's literally skeletal, and I have no control over it. The same goes for so many things that we're expected to change. Got a double chin? Society tells you that it's because you're overweight, but really it has more to do with your jawline and neck structure than anything else. Also, depending on the angle, everyone has a double chin. Got wrinkles? Society tells you that it's because you didn't have a perfect skincare regimen to avoid them, and that you didn't spend enough money on bougie eye creams. But really, wrinkles come from a life lived. Your face seeing the sun, your face being exposed to air, and your face showing emotions time and again until those lines become a part of you. I believe now that the marks, stretches, and contours on my body are not flaws. They're just part of my body, and they don't need to be fixed. Instead of being imperfections, I view them as signs that I've lived my life. Stretch marks are a sign that my body got me through puberty. For others, stretch marks are a sign that you grew a human life inside of you. Scars are a sign of your body's resilience and ability to heal. Gray hairs are a sign that you survived through years of stressors and yet persevered. These are not imperfections, and corporations don't need my money to quote-unquote fix them. These are beautiful indicators of a human life. Perfectionist lie number 5. You should feel ashamed of your body. Otherwise, you'll get complacent and you won't try to change it. I don't think anyone really says this directly, but it's essentially always the message. I think back to the movie Mean Girls, iconic by the way, and the scene where all of the girls stand in front of the mirror and start listing all of the things that they hate about their bodies. It's so common for a woman to say something about her body and for her friends to come swooping in to say that she's beautiful, but here are all the things that are wrong with my body. Oh gosh, that shirt does not make you look fat. You look so skinny. You should see me. I look so fat in my jeans. All of this comes from a well-meaning place, but ultimately what happens is that we all just end up playing into this cycle. I hate this about my body. You hate that about your body, so now I have to think about whether or not I should hate it about my own. This celebrity hates that thing about her body, my mom hates that thing about her body, my friends hate these things about their bodies, my coworkers hate these things about their bodies. It becomes a social norm and a very regular conversational topic. It's considered rare and honestly pretty weird if you don't have something that you hate about your body, like Katie Heron in that scene in Mean Girls. And let's be clear, I am absolutely not blaming women or anyone who hates their body. I am not blaming women who go on diets or are positive that they aren't exercising enough. I'm not blaming women who get plastic surgery or who Photoshop their photos to make themselves look a certain way because they're ashamed. I'm just really frustrated with a system that directly encourages all of these behaviors rooted in self-hate because they will directly profit off of them. That's where this narrative of, well, I can't get complacent comes from too. If I get complacent, if I actually like my body, if I'm okay with myself, then I'll let myself go. I'll be lazy. I won't be healthy. I'll never improve. I'll never be pretty. I'll never be thin. This narrative is also used to shame people who exist in bigger bodies. They should really take care of themselves. How could they let themselves go like that? It's so judgmental and harmful, and it's internalized fat phobia. And it's disguised as a health concern. If we hate and mock people enough, then they'll feel ashamed and actually do something about their body, so then they'll be more healthy. But that's not really the issue at play here. People existing in larger bodies around us impacts our lives not in the least. What it does do is remind people to think about their own bodies. And if you hate your own body, you're vastly more likely to overtly judge or secretly judge somebody else for theirs. Again, not blaming anyone for this. I have done it and still have to actively catch myself and scale back when I do it in the present. If you're curious, I invite you to take the implicit bias test about weight, put out by Harvard University and Project Implicit, linked in the description down below. You may be familiar with this test in how it identifies implicit biases that people have according to race, but they have one for weight too. The first time I took it, I was shocked at how significant of a bias I had for thin people over fat people. But now, looking back, with all of the messaging and perpetuated self-hate that we are fed literally every single day, I'm not surprised anymore. I retook the test today, and even after all of the work that I've done, my bias is still there. But I am ready to question it. There are generations of perfectionist lies about weight, exercise, food, and body image, and I'm frankly quite over all of them. All of the messaging that we receive around these topics come from an unforgiving, unrelenting, unkind, perfectionistic point of view that is rooted in self-hate and blame. These messages cause countless people to question their worth every single day. These messages result in disordered eating and extremely damaged relationships to food and movement. These messages cause people to spend an inordinate amount of money on body improvement fixes that could have been spent in other areas. These messages cause decreased levels of self-esteem. These messages cause our brains to doubt ourselves, question ourselves, hate ourselves. These messages cause us to be mean to ourselves and to others around us. These messages are genuinely not helpful. In Dr. Renee Engeln's book, the one I mentioned previously, she shares the research that 34% of 5-year-old girls engage in deliberate dietary restraint at least sometimes. I think about this every time I walk into a kindergarten classroom at the school at which I teach. I look around at all of the kindergarten girls and I wonder, out of the 12 of them, which 4 have already learned that they're supposed to diet? Which 5-year-olds already don't trust themselves and their bodies? Now, that is a lot of heavy information. But I hope that this episode on body image resonated with you. I hope it made you feel seen. If you've already been on a body image journey, then I hope that this episode helped you feel validated in your quest and reassured you that you can do it. If you've questioned all of the negativity surrounding body image before, but have still found yourself within the throes of it, then I see you. And I know how difficult it is to constantly keep wondering what the best thing to do might be. If you fully disagree with me and think that I'm spouting nonsense, that's fine too. I'm not here to tell anyone how to live their life. I just truly want people to be happy. And for me, excessive food restriction never made me happy. It made me feel malnourished, deprived, and really sad about what I was missing out on. Excessive exercise never made me happy. It made me feel exhausted and pushed way over my limits. Standing in front of the mirror and cataloging my flaws never made me happy. Weighing myself never made me happy. And even when I was at my thinnest weight, I still wasn't happy because I would just move the goalpost. I always had more weight to lose. Believing that didn't make me happy. It just made me feel like I would never be enough. I opened today's episode with a quote attributed to poet Nayyirah Waheed. And I said to my body, softly, I want to be your friend. It took a long breath and replied, I have been waiting my whole life for this. It's hard to put it in better words than that. I want to be my body's friend. I want to be grateful for my body. I want to accept my body. And I want to honor my body for what it does for me every single day. I want to be my body's friend because that will make me infinitely happier than thinking of my body, my encasing in this world, as my enemy. Thank you for listening today, fellow perfectionists. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, please feel free to like, comment, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more perfectionism-related content and to help the channel grow. If these episodes are resonating with you and you think they might resonate with others, please feel free to share it as well. Until next time, fellow perfectionists.